If you want to see how I built this entire structure by myself, keep on watching. Let's get started.
Over the last month, we've been steadily building this off-grid structure. We, of course, started out with the framing, then went to sheathing, and now that we have the entire structure sheathed, we can move on to siding. But before we even touch a piece of siding, we need to make sure that we have this entire area fully waterproofed with the proper layering process. In order to do so, I first flash the edges of the structure and then bring over some metal drip edge flashing so any type of moisture that hits the structure is going to be repelled away from the edges. There are a number of ways to cut the metal flashing so it bends properly around a 90-degree corner. In this application, I'm taking my speed square, marking 3 lines, each one is an inch away from each other, and then taking my metal snips and cutting down the 2 lines that I drew that are furthest away from our structure. That tab is bent down and then cut off completely, and once that's taken care of, you can cut straight to the front lip, but you don't want to cut all the way through because you're able to bend it then around that 90-degree corner perfectly. I do apply a heavy bead of sealant around this corner just in case, and then fold the lip and proceed to nailing it off. Now, my nailing skills could be improved in some instances, but that's okay, especially since we're just going to be covering up any penetrations with our flashing tape in the end. With any transition from one piece of metal to the other, you do want to make sure you apply a heavy bead of sealant at that seam to transition that one edge to the next, but other than that, it's the same process over and over and over again since it's the same 90-degree corner all the way around. As I mentioned previously, we are now applying a heavy membrane flashing tape around those fasteners, along with making sure that the transitional edge between the metal and our plywood is fully taped off. With that transition accounted for, I could stop there with this membrane flashing tape, but I do tape off the corners of our structure. Now, this isn't generally seen, but I always want to make sure and add a bit more waterproofing protection just because the layering process and all of the penetrations moving forward with the nails can be cumbersome, especially in the corners. They're certainly more prone to moisture than anywhere else in this structure, except for any doorways or windows. This is also a very vital area to make sure we waterproof properly prior to installing any of our siding. Just make sure that we are using the proper layering process, which is straightforward as long as you know the general principle of gravity, because all that rain is going to be going from top to bottom if there does happen to be any moisture getting through, and therefore making sure that the top piece of flashing is the last piece of flashing you apply is always key in terms of layering the seams of our tape, or in other cases, our Tyvek house wrap, which we're going to be applying around the entire structure. Our first layer of Tyvek house wrap is going to be going over our membrane flashing along with our metal flashing, but I do want to leave approximately 1 to 2 inches of space between the bottom drip edge to the bottom edge of our Tyvek, just so it's not resting on the bottom of our metal flashing. This first layer is one continuous piece around the entire perimeter, but then we have to get a little creative since this is a uniquely shaped building as well. Just keep in mind that we need to have at least 6 inches of overlap between one layer to the next. Once all of our Tyvek house wrap is applied, we can start taping off all the seams. There is a specific tape dedicated for Tyvek house wrap, which in all honesty isn't expensive, so I figured use this tape versus anything else if you're going to be doing it correctly. Just keep in mind the general premise of proper layering, because you do want to make sure you're applying the bottom section first and working your way up. With our Tyvek accounted for, we can make our way to some trim. Now we are going to have a bit of a unique modern style, and I do want to make sure it's gorgeous, but I also don't want to make it look like just any other shed or off-grid structure out there, which is why we're going to be first starting out with this trim. This trim is going to be going up to 8 feet tall all the way around, but I do need to make sure that that 8-foot mark at the very top is exactly the same all the way around, because that's going to act as a transitional point between one piece of siding to the next. In order to make this an easy process, I take my laser level, set it up, measure how high that laser hits on my first piece of trim, and then make a mark on my second piece of trim at that measurement, and that way I can guarantee, as long as these two pieces of trim are the same exact length, that the top of them will be the same exact height if it lines up with the laser level. Once all of our trim is installed on all 4 corners, we can move on to siding. But again, before we get to siding, we want to make sure that we know exactly where our stud placements are located. And I did make marks on my first layer of Tyvek house wrap to note exactly where each stud was placed. And that's because of the type of siding we're going to be using on this project.
For the siding on this project, we could have gone with a number of different types of materials, but on this project, at least for the lower half, we're going to go with Hardie plank. Now this is more of a cement-based product, which basically means it's not going to burn, but it also means that we have a little extra work and extra protection ahead of us.
When I said extra protection, it's more about making sure that we are using the proper respirator and PPE when cutting the material. Because this is a cementitious type product, we certainly don't want any of this dust getting in our lungs. And the first strip, our starter strip, is a small piece that needs to be cut off at the very base of one of the boards. And Diablo has a special Hardie plank blade that is designed to cut this exact type of material. If you used a wood blade, it certainly would cut it, but it would damage that blade very quickly in comparison to this type of blade. So keep that in mind if you're using this type of material. Also keep in mind that when you do cut this material, especially in very thin strips, it's going to be more prone to breaking. And that's why the very first time I cut this material and handled it, I accidentally snapped it in half. Not a big deal, and in all honesty, this was one of only 2 pieces that broke over the course of the entire installation process. So the material still is very easy to manage. You just need to make sure that you're not bending it in awkward directions one way or the other, especially on 12-foot long sections. The starter strip should be placed 1 to 2 inches above the drip edge flashing, and once that's installed, we can move on to our first full piece of siding. We can obviously cut these boards to the perfect length with our circular saw, but if you want to avoid making more of a mess and more dust, you can actually score the boards with a utility blade and then just knock off that small piece with your foot or a hammer. It doesn't leave the edge perfectly smooth the way the circular saw would, but we don't need it to be perfectly smooth because we're going to be leaving an 1/8 inch gap on any section where that board meets up with our trim. When nailing, we should be approximately 1 inch down from the top lip of our siding, and that will provide confidence that the material won't be cracking on us, but it also will make sure that we are able to overlap that seam of nails every single time we place another piece of siding on our structure. Once our first 2 pieces of siding are installed, the installation process becomes much easier thanks to these siding gauges. Now these are called gecko gauge siding gauges, and this means that you're able to install it right underneath the lip that you just previously installed, and not only provide you a perfect way to hold the piece in place while you nail, but also provide the exact distance between lap siding to lap siding. And that is a very important step because we want to make sure that stays the same all the way up our structure. The beautiful thing about these gauges is that you can actually adjust them from 4 inch to 8 inch, and since these pieces of Hardie plank are 9 1/4 inch wide, an 8 inch reveal is what we're installing on this application. Plus, because these gauges are basically just clamping down on the lower section, they don't leave any marks or damage to our siding as we're installing it from section to section. As for the nails and tool itself, I'm using a Metabo coil siding nailer, and the nails are 2 inch long galvanized ring shank nails. In terms of the installation process, what I found that was fastest is that I would cut approximately 4 of the boards at one time and then go to my structure and start installing each individual row. And that means that if there are just some slight adjustments that need to be made on the length of the planks as you move up, they can be taken care of and accounted for at that time. Once you get up high enough where you can't install another full piece of siding, I decide to make a measurement at that location going off of the trim on both sides. And with that measurement, I'm able to account for the overall thickness that needs to be made on my final piece of siding. This piece does have to be cut with a circular saw just to make sure that we have a consistently clean edge, but also remember that this is the final piece that we're installing on this side of our structure, because above it is going to be a completely different type of siding. One that I think is truly going to make this entire project stand out in the end. But before we get to that portion of the video, we do need to make sure that we install the remaining siding around the entire structure. Now, I did hold off on the siding on our door side because, in all honesty and full disclosure, the door isn't here yet. It is delayed, and unfortunately, I'm not going to be receiving it until next week. But I have received confirmation that it has shipped, which basically guarantees us that it will be installed in the very near future unless something happens during transit. Hopefully not. With our Hardie plank installed, we can now make our way to the second portion of our siding, and that is going to be cedar decking boards of all things. Yep, this is what we're going to be going with in the top portion, and hear me out, I think it's going to look extremely good, but we're trying to think ahead and we're going to be applying a finish to these boards even before they're installed.
If I'm going to put this much amount of energy into a project like this, I might as well make it unique. And for this project, on the top, we're going to be going with some cedar boards. These are actually deck boards that I picked up at my local Home Depot, and actually much more reasonably priced than a lot of the other cedar they have there, as well as specifically designed for exterior areas like the Pacific Northwest, where we get a lot of rain and moisture. But with that, I wanted to apply a quality product that I didn't have to ever worry about it peeling over time. And this is where smart biohemp comes into play. I've applied this to numerous different types of products around my own house, and I've seen amazing results from it. So I'm gonna put it on this and see how we do. Fun thing is applying this product is a lot easier than most.
Earlier this year, I did randomly stumble across Smart Biohemp at a trade show that I was at, and they shipped out some product to me for free. I tried it out. I really did enjoy the overall experience with applying the product. It seemed to work beautifully, and that is also why they're the sponsor of this week's video. They have some bold claims that they stand behind on their website, saying that it's safe so you don't have to wear gloves or masks. It's a natural plant-based product, and it's 100% eco-friendly with a plant-based ingredient blend from Mother Nature. Now that is some verbiage that I really did want to know more about, which is why I'm personally going to be walking their entire facility later this year and doing an entire video on how the product is fully made. I'm super excited about this opportunity because I've never had any type of finish manufacturer give me the opportunity to walk their facility and see how their product is truly made. I always want to be extremely genuine upfront with my audience because I value your honest opinion. So if you do try this product out, make sure you leave a comment section and let me know what you personally think. I'll make sure and have the product linked in the video description below if you're interested. As I wait for that second layer of finish to absorb and penetrate through the wood, I go back to my structure and start installing a bit more metal flashing. Now this is the same exact flashing that we use at the very base of our structure, but at this location we need a transitional joint from one section of siding to the other. In terms of the installation process, it's basically the same exact scenario that we did below because the 90s are still those 90 degrees, along with the transitions between one piece of metal flashing to the next. If you're doing this solo, you might need a bit of an added piece of blocking, especially at the center point here, since we have nothing to hold on to, but is simple enough and can be accounted for quite easily. One thing to think about is that there are a number of installation methods of this type of trim in these scenarios, and in some of them they actually tell you to cut the Tyvek that is on the house and loop this piece of metal flashing underneath that piece of Tyvek house wrap. For me personally, that just really doesn't make too much sense because I don't want to put any more penetrations than needed in my Tyvek house wrap. But I still know as to why they're saying that, and in order to add a bit more protection around this perimeter because of all the penetrations that we placed on it, I apply another layer of Tyvek house wrap just right over that seam, along with going about halfway up on the high side. A layer of Tyvek tape in between those seams are also accounted for here, but after that, I feel that's plenty sufficient in terms of waterproof and protection, and I can move on to my siding. Yep, this siding is now fully dried, and if there's any excess Smart Biohemp that's still left on there, you can easily wipe off that finish with a lint-free cloth, because it just means that the wood has fully absorbed the finish and is ready to be installed. With this first board, I made a quick mark indicating the roof line according to where the board is going to line up, and then just matched that mark with my miter saw and then bring it back over to our structure, make sure it lines up with our roof line, which it does perfectly, and as long as that's accounted for, I can make a notation at the very base noting exactly where I need to cut the end-all be-all length to it. This first piece of wood trim is definitely vital because this is going to be an area where it's more prone to moisture, so I do want to make sure it's lined up properly with the piece of trim that's going to be on the front of our structure eventually. But before I get to that run, I'm going to be doing the side of our structure first, which definitely is going to be more time consuming and difficult than the front face because every single one of these measurements is going to be different. Yeah. That's the unfortunate nature of having a lean-to style roofline, is because every single one of these measurements is going to have a different length to it. Not a different angle, just a different length because it's going in a downward direction. In terms of the installation pattern, this is considered, I'd say, more of a board and batten, because there's technically two layers, the base layer and then the layer that's protruding past that layer, and that's going to be where our overlapping seams are located. These boards are 3.5 inches wide, and I'm going to be having a space of approximately 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches between each section. That means we're going to have approximately 1 inch of overlap on each side of the boards. In terms of the process, it's a very straightforward process. It's just a time-consuming process since every single one of these boards is different. Therefore, I have to measure 1.5 inches over from each section, then take a measurement, cut that piece to length, and then proceed to get it installed. All in all, I think this is a beautiful look, and I do truly love how this turned out. But just keep in mind, if you are doing this, to note that it's going to take some time to do so, because between this side and the front side took me an entire day to install. One key note though that will make the process faster on the opposite side is to make sure you write all the numbers down, because those numbers correlate with the same exact numbers you're going to need on the opposite side, making at least the measuring process much faster and quicker. With one side accounted for, we could push our efforts to the front side of our structure. And with this, the same 15-degree mark is placed, but just in a different direction on our cedar boards. But the truly nice thing is that every single one of these boards on this side is the same exact length, 43.5 inches long. The only thing that makes this side slightly complicated is that we have to account for all of our roof joists and making sure that these cedar boards account for the transition between those roof joists, which for the most part is easily taken care of with a simple table saw. As I mentioned previously, this edge is going to be more prone to moisture, so in order to combat that, I do apply a heavy bead of clear sealant at this location in order to guarantee that I have a watertight barrier at this location for years to come. With the sealant in, I can start nailing off our corner board, and also be rest assured that I put plenty of nails at this location as well. And if you're wondering what type of nails I'm using 2.5-inch long 16 gauge stainless steel nails. Now these are a straight run and I don't have to worry about these nails ever corroding our cedar over time, which might be a concern for galvanized in certain applications, especially for softer woods like cedar. One thing that really sped up the cutting process, if you're able to, is set up some type of stop block. And now if you don't have a miter saw stand like this, you can still easily set up some type of stop block that manages to give you the same exact length every single time. Really, the only thing that takes a bit of extra time in this process is to just adjust the degree of the saw every single time, because I do have to change it to 15 degrees and then back to 0 for each board, but that really is a minimal amount of time and effort. Now inevitably, as you're installing these deck siding boards, you are going to have a joist that lands perfectly in the center of a board. And with that, a table saw still comes into play, but the thing that's different is going to be a multi-tool. But this is also just another reason why I love a multi-tool and always have it on hand on a job site, because it makes a difficult plunge cut like this a breeze and I can get back to installing. After installing all these boards, the only thing I came down to that I would change differently is if I could get my hands on 6-inch wide decking boards. Now there are 4-inch wide or 6-inch wide decking boards, and the only ones available at my local Home Depot was these 4-inch wide boards. But if you're able to get to the wider ones, that just means less work for you down the line and less cutting. Plus, it should be approximately the same exact cost per square foot of siding. With all of our cedar siding installed above and our door still not here, I need to make our efforts known on our roof since the summer is quickly ending and that means rain's coming to the Pacific Northwest.
For this build, we're going to be going with Euroshield, and you might not know about this because it's kind of a unique product. This is made up of 100% recycled tires and extremely durable. It has over a 50-year warranty. And I just installed it on my own personal house and I had a little extra left, so I figured it'd be perfect to match this roof with the adjacent roof right next to it. The nice thing about these shingles is that they're extremely easy to install, even easier than asphalt shingles based upon what I've seen in the past. So let's get to it.
With any roof, you should have a starter course, and with this installation, you can use the back half as your own starter course for our roofline. This is a very easy one-sided roof structure, so the installation is going to be pretty straightforward. The one thing we do have to think about and account for with this type of product is that sealant is going to be involved. A heavy layer of this tri-built high-performance elastomeric sealant is placed at the base of our roofline, then our starter row is placed right on top of that. We start nailing off these sheets immediately, and please note that these sheets come with indicators noting exactly how many times you should be nailing it and where you should be nailing each sheet. Makes it a no-brainer for any installation team, whether it's the pros or the DIYers. Because the shingles are a rubber-based product, we do have to do a couple unique measures of applying sealant at the ends of your roofline. Certainly doesn't take a ton of time, but is a secondary measure in order to make sure that the ends of our shingles have a bit extra support along the way. I strike a chalk line at the very beginning of the installation process just to guarantee that we are working off of a straight line from the very beginning, which will just make the installation of our shingles hopefully as smooth as possible. As we make our way towards the very end of our first row, we're going to have to cut a piece to the correct length. What I found was the most productive as well as the most accurate was actually to place the product in position first, make a mark on both sides of the shingle, use your speed square or contractor square to line up exactly where you want to cut it, and then peel off the excess and place it down as needed. Just don't forget your sealant before you lay it down and nail it down. After we have our first row completely installed, we make our way to the second, but in order to make our way to the second, we have to cut off a bit of excess on the back side prior to installing this second row. We do this in order to line up this edge with the indicators built into each row. Now there are 4 indicators on the row, which means that we have 1 full row along with 4 separate rows, which gives us a staggering pattern of 5. This really makes the installation process very straightforward, especially for someone who doesn't do it on a daily basis like myself. And you know immediately as you're installing these shingles that they're much more durable and structurally sound than a traditional asphalt shingle. I will have a link in the video description below that showcases how this product is fully installed on an entire roof, which was much more detailed than this video, but inevitably this is a much easier roof to install. This roofing does have a 50-year warranty, and for good reason, because it's used quite heavily in areas where they have extreme hailstorms. Not worried too much about that based upon where I live, but it really is nice to have a very durable product, especially overhead when there is a large tree with limbs that could fall down eventually. Keep in mind that any excess that you cut on one side can also be simultaneously used on the opposite side, most likely, to fill those gaps and spaces. And once you get in that roofing flow state, the installation becomes a breeze, in large part due to the indicators that are built into each shingle.
So if we go over here to really get an example of how easy it is. So we have row 1, row 1, row 2, row 3, and row 4. And then the next row is just a full sheet right here. Super easy and simple. Now, let's just get to the rest.
During the sheathing process, I did realize that the interior of the structure is quite dark, even though we have one large opening, which is why I made the executive decision to drill 2 large holes in my roof for 2 solar dome skylights. Now, these are actually quite cool, and I'm excited to see what they look like when it's all said and done, but simply enough, all you have to do is to drill a large pilot hole to make sure that you're centered over the opening below, then mark out exactly where the dome top and bottom portion is on the interior section and measure out 12.5 inches across. In order to cut the hole out in the most efficient way, we grabbed my jigsaw and cut out that section of our roof line, because that's going to be approximately the size that we need for our dome tube to be placed into. Doesn't have to be the cleanest cut, since it's going to be covered up completely and concealed from the interior as well as the exterior, so just keep that in mind. Try and make sure it's centered between joist to joist. With a heavy bead of sealant all the way around, I'm able to then reposition our skylight dome, press it down firmly, and screw it down with the specified screws needed in this application. With the lid of our dome fully secured, I then go around the perimeter, apply a bit of sealant on the top of every single fastener, and once that's taken care of, we also want to apply a secondary bead of sealant around the perimeter of the structure. Again, overkill, but might as well be overkill at this point than having a leak happen down the road. A final measure of protection is some flashing membrane tape around the edge of the dome, and once we take care of that, we can move on to shingling around the dome as well. I line up the shingle with the dome outlet and make 2 marks on both sides. Once I have those 2 marks, I then determine where the back edge of our dome is as well, and then connect all 3 of those lines together. I score the trace line with my utility blade, then easily remove any of the excess shingle and place it perfectly over the dome, which did fit the very first time, which is always nice. I do try and avoid any further penetrations into the dome shield, but occasionally you might have to get a little bit close to one edge or the other. Just keep in mind that this is a layering process, so those nails that we just placed should be covered up completely with the next adjacent row. Just like any of my videos, any of the products or tools that you see in this video will have a link in the video description below, so if you are interested in any of these products, please make sure you check them out for yourself. We made quick work of the final few rows, but as we make our way up to the very top section, we come across the final row. Now these are the panels that I previously did the starter strip for, and the installation process of these, again, is very straightforward and easy by applying one roofing nail per each shake emblem. With any roof structure, you're not going to have one perfect row at the very end, so I did have to cut off any of the excess, and the easiest way to do this was to take my 6-foot level, line it up approximately where I think the roof line is, and then take a sharp utility blade and score the very end of our shingles in order to perfectly and easily remove any excess as needed. But just remember, we are approximately 12 feet off the ground in this location, so please be careful if you are doing this yourself, since we are living on the edge over here. The final piece of metal drip edge flashing at the top of our roof line is a standard 2x3 piece of metal. Now, in order to have a nice crisp edge at this angle, all I need to do is strike a line at 2 inches and then take my snips and go straight across. Then bend it over and we have a perfect 90-degree corner, but prior to installing that trim, we do have to apply a heavy bead of sealant all the way across in the grooves as well as directly on the shake imprint. With that, our metal trim can be positioned accordingly and screwed down as needed. Now the screws themselves are important because you do want to use metal roofing screws, which not only make it easy to drill through this metal, but also has a built-in gasket so you don't have to worry about water intrusion after you start drilling holes into your roof. When it comes to finishing off the skylights, these are technically called 10-inch acrylic dome sun tunnel skylights. They're from a company called Velux, hopefully that's pronounced correctly, but technically speaking, this type of sun tunnel is normally used in areas where you have attics, so you have a lot more space to work with. But in this application, we make do, since this is a very nice kit and provides basically everything we need for the installation process, along with even tape, screws, and of course these metal tubes that hopefully are reflecting the light as it goes into our dwelling. Our large waterproof cap is placed right on top with 4 screws, and once that's installed, the final step of this video is to apply one final finish coat of our Smart Biohemp finish on our roof trim. Now, I really do wish I applied this directly to the product just as I did previously with the deck boards, but I wasn't thinking ahead of time in this circumstance. Therefore, I had to do it on a little bit of a sketchy scenario, but luckily I took my time and patience, and this was as easy as can be with very minimal drips. But with that, we are 100% complete on this roof along with the siding for this project. Truly one absolutely beautiful look and feel to know that we are one step closer with the completion of this project. It's turned out incredible. Thank you so much for this entire journey. I know it's been a little bit longer of a process than I originally anticipated, but again, life happens and therefore some things are just out of your control. Luckily, it's one beautiful, sexy beast of a solo off-grid gym build eventually. Oh yeah,